So we now know the pathway to the college football playoff is going to be on the 5-7 format. 5 conference champion winners, 7 at-large bids. How those at-large bids go, Notre Dame, the SEC, the ACC, group of 5 schools, that's a conversation for a later date. But that's going to be the pathway toward winning a national title for the next 2 seasons. And then after that, more change could be coming to the college football playoff. Changes that nobody outside of the bureaucrats and those that are looking to put a few more bucks in their pocket really are interested in making. So let's go ahead and discuss those potential changes and why this is bad for college football. But if you're new to the channel, welcome on in. Make sure you hit the subscribe button down below because we talk college football every single day on this platform. Recap in 2023, a look ahead in 2024, NIL, transfer portal, betting lines. So if this is your daily dose of college football content you need for the offseason, might I recommend you hit the ring notification. That way you don't miss a single thing we're doing on this platform. Tell your friends, your family, your mortal enemies, best of bros, the drunk dude passed out in a Waffle House parking lot about this channel, college football aficionados everywhere, because we're on the race to become the #1 YouTube show talking about our favorite sport. Continue to follow me on social media, Twitter, X, Instagram, TikTok, at Mr. Cole Thompson. That way, conversations surrounding our favorite sport never have to stop flowing. So, more changes coming to college football playoff. Yes, potentially. According to a report from Yahoo Sports' Ross Dellinger, there was a meeting earlier this week among the playoff committee about potential expansion. Keep in mind, right now, we have a 12-team playoff. We know the format. We don't know how many teams are going to be represented per conference, but we do know that it is a 5-7 model that will lead you to the postseason. For now. But now there's questions coming on. Well, we know that the ratings are going to go up. The revenue is going to be substantial. Depending on how we go about adding in teams, we're going to get more representation and also a little bit more funds in our pocket. It's going to be great for television, great for ratings. People are going to be invested in over the course of a month. Why don't we just expand it? 12 teams is fine. 12 teams is good. But what about 14 teams? Well, maybe not 14. That's maybe too few. What about 16 teams? And then 16 leads to 24, and 24 leads to 32, and 32 leads to 64. And then basically, it's like if you give a mouse a cookie and the entire world decides to blow up. That's what's going on now in the world of college football. And I hate it. And I think most people would agree with me that they hate it because there's so many dialects that go into this. We're preaching about diversity. We're preaching about more opportunities. And we're preaching about the chance for representation with other conferences. The bottom line is that with every chance of expansion, all that means is that the teams that eventually bring in the most revenue are going to have a better shot of upping their opportunities to make it to the CFP. So when you talk about this diversity thing, just remember, it's diverse for the SEC and the Big Ten because they hold all the cards right now. Tony Petitti and Greg Sankey have made it official that they are trying to do everything possible to fix college athletics. And what that means is they're looking into the NIL collective, they're looking into the transfer portal, window and opportunity dates for early recruiting, signing periods, waiver-wise, everything that goes along those sides. That's what Tony Petitti and Greg Sankey are doing. And they're also doing it that way they have an upper hand against the College Football Playoff Committee because they realize if you don't play with us, we're going to go start our own league. And we're going to go ahead and create what we've all been projecting, Super Conference, where we just battle it out and everyone knows you can have your own little national championship, but it's going to be nowhere near the level of what we're at. We're going to become the new faces of college football. And we'll invite teams in as we feel that are necessary. We'll bring in the opponents that we think are going to up the level of competition for our sport. And this is where a conference commissioner is really needed. A conference commissioner has been needed for years now, at least for the last 2 seasons, especially when it comes to the reallocations or the relocations of conferences, the dissolvement of the Pac-12, NIL, the transfer portal, window dates for now early signing period, late signing period, or national signing day, as we call it. There's just so many things that could be determined by one person having the final vote that would really reconstruct college football as we know it for the better. Right now, there is no reason for college football playoff expansion. There was always going to be the conversation of adding in more teams. And naturally, you figured that was going to be the case because they want more revenue. And so, as somebody that wasn't a major fan of college football expansion, I said 8 teams. 8 teams was the perfect number. Let me explain why. Because with 8 teams, it leaves the pageantry of the regular season intact, but it ups the opportunity for you to have better representation. There is no difference in that. Go look at last season's 8 teams that would have been in the college football playoff. they would have had something to play for. Whether it be the 4 teams that did get in, so Alabama, Michigan, Texas, and Washington. Then you have your other 4 teams. Liberty would get in as the group of 5 school, an undefeated group of 5 conference champion. They also would add in, more than likely, Georgia and Florida State. One was an undefeated Power 5 conference champion. The other one lost 1 game in their last 30 appearances. And the final team would either be Ohio State or Oregon. Oregon did its job throughout the regular season. They went 11-1. And Ohio State did its job throughout the regular season. They just couldn't represent themselves in Indianapolis because they play in the same division as Michigan. So those have been the 8 teams. Anybody have any arguments with that? Anybody have any arguments with those being the 8? Because it keeps the intact rivalries for an Ole Miss. It keeps the intact rivalries for a school like Missouri, for a school like Arizona, for Oklahoma. Without the 8-team playoff, with the 12-team playoff, you lose a little bit of that ambiance. And I love the regular season. I think most people love the regular season. And those out there who are saying you hate college football because you don't want expansion, that's the furthest thing from the truth. We want authenticity in the sport. And the way that you keep the authenticity at an all-time high is making the games matter. So in a 12-team playoff right now, a school like Penn State could lose every single year to Ohio State and Michigan, or now in the Big Ten, Ohio State and Oregon, or maybe Ohio State and USC, like they play this season. And it's going to do nothing. It means absolutely nothing. Conference championship weekend, really, for the Big Ten and for the SEC, means absolutely nothing. There's no stakes involved. More than likely, they've done enough on paper and on the field to guarantee a spot in the postseason picture. But when you expand it even further, the games that are out of conference mean absolutely nothing at this point, especially for these high-profile matchups. Week 1, you get Clemson versus Georgia in Atlanta. Do you know what type of game that's going to be, especially if if Garrett Riley is able to now get the best version of Kate Klubnik? What if, by any means whatsoever, the defense doesn't take a step forward for Georgia this year and it somewhat regresses underneath Kirby Smart? That's a must-see game. Week 2, you got Michigan versus Texas in the Big House. A year ago, that game would have had massive implications, just like the Alabama-Texas game did. Now, well, you lose to Michigan. It's not the end of the world. Just beat up on Oklahoma, Florida, Georgia, and everyone else in the SEC. You're good to go. In fact, you probably can lose one of those games and still be good to go. Ole Miss's game last season against LSU mattered. It also mattered against Georgia. Now, they lose both those games. They won one, lost one last year. Not that big of a deal. So the pageantry of the game is losing its ambience already with the 12-team playoff. What happens with the 14 playoff? You're basically saying, hey, it doesn't matter when you lose. If you play in one of these major conferences, you're going to be good. And that's the entire point that we got to get back to here, people. None of this is opening up diversity for the group of 5 schools, for the Power 4 schools outside of the Big Ten and the SEC. They hold all the cards. They're sitting at the poker table, looking down, realizing that they have deuces, and they're saying, I'm just going to make them bluff. I'm going to make them bluff to think that I'm leaving, and they're going to all fold, and they're going to listen to what I want. I'm going to take all this cash, and I'm going to profit. That's what's happening with the SEC and the Big Ten right now. And do I think that more competition is good for the sport? Yes. In terms of these games, here's the other thing that nobody seems to be bringing up right now. Let's say you expand to 16 teams. So now nobody gets a bye. 1 versus 16, 2 versus 15. It's just like a bracket in March Madness. Nobody gets a day off. Well, now you're adding in one more extra game to the schedule, on top of adding in potentially one more game to the schedule for several of these teams because they're playing in a conference championship. The conference champion won't get a bye anymore, so that means that they won't have a week to prepare. And on top of all of that, that's adding more games to the schedule. We're pushing closer and closer towards an NFL schedule. Don't you think that's going to have a little bit of value when it comes to NIL? Because now you're talking about these players wanting to join into the party. They want to be a part of a national championship team, but they also realize, well, what happens if I get hurt in the postseason? I tear my ACL, and now I'm out for an entire year. This was my last season. I have to go to the NFL draft. I just lost a crap load of money in terms of what was going to be my draft stance. I may be lucky to get picked at all. And so now we talk about these opt-outs. People are excited to see what happens with the playoff expansion. More teams, fewer opt-outs, better bowl matchups, better games for better ratings. And instead, now you still see opt-outs. What's going to happen when you finally get that one team that feels like they can run the table? They're hot at the end of the year. November rolls around. They win every game by double digits. They're easily coasting towards a conference championship. And then their star wide receiver says, I'm going to opt out. I've done my part. I know I'm good enough to make it in the NFL, and I don't want to hurt my chances of potentially getting top 5 money versus first round money or second round money because I get injured in the bowl game. It's going to happen. It's going to happen as you expand the playoff, because as you expand the playoff, you expand games. And ultimately, this leads to more problems when it comes to the future of college football. So, bottom line, you don't need to expand the playoff right now. That would be, in my opinion, the most egregious move made by the committee. You have to realize that 12 is already a perplexing number. Don't go ahead and ruin it even further by giving more buys and more opportunities when the opportunities aren't going to be graced to everyone. And the big thing is that everyone realizes that because they don't want the SEC and the Big Ten to depart and create their own competition, they're going to fall on the sword to protect the intensity that is college football right now. And if that's going to be the case, nobody really wins. Yeah, the SEC and the Big Ten continue to get teams in. The money continues to flow into the pockets of the boosters that are providing all these resources at the universities. But as a product, eventually you are going to start to see more troubles, more trepidation, and more faults in line with this new college football playoff format. 12 teams feels like a way too many high number. 16 feels like one where you will see opt-outs. You will see players continue to fall down the pathway, because at that point, the regular season doesn't matter. The national championship really doesn't matter. Everything for you is about putting on best numbers possible. That way you can hear your name called and make it to the next level of your career. Maybe that's going to be the case. Maybe it's not. But as of right now, with more changes coming to college football, this is one of those moments that just needs to be put to the wayside. There's no reason to go ahead and expand it, especially if you really care about the sport. Make sure you hit the subscribe button down below. Leave a comment telling me your thoughts. Is expansion for the college football playoff after 2026 good, bad, indifferent? Tell your friends, your family, your mortal enemies, best of bros, college football aficionados everywhere about this channel, because we're on the race to become the #1 YouTube show talking about our favorite sport. Follow me on social media at Mr. Cole Thompson, Twitter, X, Instagram. Slide in the DMs. And until next time, I am Cole Thompson. See you later, folks.